This panel will be moderated by Suvir Bajaj, co-founder Zoom Media and Foxy Moron. And he will be joined by Abhishek Shah, Head of Marketing Bharat Pay, Neeraj Sangani, COO, Hansa Security, Sumit Singh, CMO, Info Edge India. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Hi, I can't see my other panelists though. Hi, Abhishek. Hi, Neeraj. Hi, Sumit. Cool. Finally, everyone's here. A very good evening to all you guys, and welcome to our panel on first-party data. Thank you guys for the introduction. And before we go forward, I'm going to let our panelists quickly give a quick one-line introduction on themselves. I'll start with myself. My name is Suvir Bajaj, and I'm the co-founder of Foxy Moron. We're an integrated content, media, data, and technology solutions company headquartered in Bombay, and we work with brands across the roster, ranging from consumer products to technology brands to durables to auto to BFSI across the board. Neeraj, why don't you go next and give us a one-line introduction on yourselves?
So hi, this is Neeraj Pratap. I head Hansa Equity. It's a data-driven marketing company. We operate at the intersection of marketing and technology. From a customer experience, customer engagement, acquisition point of view, we've been at the cutting edge of data-driven marketing in India for the last 15 years. Thank you.
Super. Thanks for that, Neeraj. Abhishek?
Hey everyone, this is Abhishek. I head marketing for Bharat Pay. We are a fintech startup. Yeah.
Cool. And last but not least, Sumit, over to you.
Hi, I'm Sumit, and I basically lead marketing for the brands within Info Edge. Info Edge is a consumer internet company, and we run brands like Naukri.com, 99acres.com, Jeevansathi.com, Shiksha.com, amongst the bigger businesses that we have.
Super. Thanks for
Glad
that.
to be here.
Excellent. So we have a very illustrious panel and hope to have a very fruitful conversation with all of you. Before we jump in, I just want to share a little insight actually that I came across last night. Of course, we've been locked down in Bombay since the last 9-10 days, whatever, 5-6 days or so. So there's nowhere really to go. And I just went downstairs in my building to my neighbor's flat, and I was having dinner with them, and I met his children, and his son was discussing with me, and he said, Suvir, I was reading an article, and Jackie Shroff is, now he's trying to turn from an actor to a producer. And I said, oh, that's really interesting because I'm a big fan of Jackie Shroff. And, he came to me and he shared this news with me. And I was like, what kind of movies do you think he'll produce? And he said he wrote he gave an interview to a journalist saying that he wants to produce a movie about women for women. And I was like, that's really funny because Jackie Shroff is always considered to be one of those really macho men. And like, he's a male icon, he's always been a male icon, big guy, started working out in the 90s, big mustache, And my neighbor's son tells me, 13-year-old guy, young guy, he's like, in this interview, Jackie Shroff confessed that he slept with over 308 women. And I looked at him and I was like, yeah. And he's like, don't you have a panel on first party data tomorrow? I think that's what he was doing. He was collecting first party data so he could make this movie in his 60s. So we had a good laugh about this. And just a little bit of humor to break the ice before we jump into the serious stuff. No, but that's what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about first-party data, what first-party data is, how it impacts our lives as brands, as marketers and advertisers, and to demystify this cloud around why first-party data has become so increasingly important in this advertising and marketing world as we evolve and prepare for the coming decade. So let's start by setting the context first to help our viewers and listeners across platforms understand what first-party data really is. Of course, over the last decade as digital marketers, we've all been very familiar with the concept of third-party data that's been accessible to us across a variety of different interfaces and platforms. But over the course of the last few years, there's been a very big push towards brands and marketers generating and collecting first-party data on their own. So let's start off by understanding what first-party data really is and how it differentiates from third-party data. Neeraj, why don't you start and jump in?
Sure. So I'd like to set the context from a brand perspective and from a publisher perspective. So there are two parts to it. And, depending on whom you're talking to, the definition of first party, second party, and third party data varies. To put it very simply and explain it, first party data is transaction data or the customer data that a brand or an organization has with them or collects in the course of doing business with that brand. Typically, second-party data is data which you get when you tie up or associate with another brand. Say if you're a credit card, you tie up with a bunch of fine dining restaurants and you start giving offers, and the customers of that fine dining restaurant start getting offers from that credit card company. So that's the second-party data which you gather through associations, and you communicate through those kind of associations. The third-party data, typically from a brand perspective, is everything else. Basically, the social media piece, the digital piece, the advertising, digital advertising that you do, the contacts that you get at the customer contact centers, the leads that are dropped on your website and stuff. So huge amount of third-party data, of course, exists. Now, when I look at it from a publisher's point of view, for publishers, that's first-party data. Okay. They collect that data from that audiences. They receive millions of visitors, thousands of people coming on their sites. They send out thousands of email newsletters almost on a daily basis to a lot of their subscribers. They run a lot of feedback surveys for a lot of brands and stuff like that. So there are multiple data points at which people are interacting with each other. From a brand perspective, you're talking of transaction data, you're talking of service data. So if I give you an example, say we're talking of a bank. I might have a savings account in a bank, and I might have fixed deposits. I might be having a credit card of the same bank. I might be having taken a loan, a personal loan or a home loan from the same bank. Each of this is a separate business. Typically, a bank has 40, 50 different sets of businesses that they're operating. And each of those businesses collects that data as their own data. Now, Neeraj is one customer, and he's talking to 3 different branches of your bank. And each one of them treats him as a separate customer because they are not talking to each other. So these are the challenges with first-party data at this point of time. So when you talk, say, from an automotive perspective, if you're talking of an automotive run, I dropped a lead on the website, the contact center contacts me, I go to the dealership to get a test drive, then I book the vehicle online, and then I finally buy the vehicle, and then I get into service and maintenance. These are all various touch points that a brand has with one customer. All of this data sits in separate silos at this point of time. But this is all, as we simply define it, is first-party data. I think that's the most important context that I wanted to set from a first-party data point of view.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Neeraj. Actually, you left off at a very interesting point where you spoke about the multiplicity of touch points that brands could potentially have with their consumers, and I think that's also where Benjamin had ended his last, his last presentation with as well. And Sumit, I'll tag you in as well, because you speak on behalf of the publisher side or the product side, and you guys have been in the business of collecting first-party data with audiences or customers that have been interacting with your platforms for ages, right? There are obviously a lot of advantages of collecting this data when it comes to understanding your audiences. So why don't you walk us through some of the advantages that first-party data collection helps in understanding your audiences better?
Okay, let me just start maybe with an example.
Sure.
So say, let me give an example from Naukri, right? So a job seeker comes in and very often registers a profile, and a typical profile will give all his or her data on education, on experience, and you look at that and you would kind of look at in the olden days when technology was not as advanced as it is today, you would read the profile, the algorithm would make some matches on keywords, etc., and surface jobs to them as part of recommendations, right? And then came more sophisticated ways of collecting data, right? And so today, while the job seeker actually gives in his experience and say that I'm somebody who's worked in 4 IT firms, right? And I handle marketing for them. Naturally, when you look at the profile, you feel the person would be interested to move into now better profiles within IT, But what first-party data does is I can actually now see where is this particular candidate applying? Where is he or she spending time? What kind of jobs is he or she viewing? And that is very, very rich information, because otherwise we would just look at a profile. And a very typical example is, when you see an engineer who's worked for 3 years or 2 years and then done an MBA, actually to change his field. An engineer does an MBA not to then start again in a coding line. But if you just look at the CV and don't look at behavior, because there is rich experience on engineering, an algorithm would have kept providing engineering jobs to the guy, which can be very, very frustrating, because here I've done a 2-year degree in management, wanting to change, but how do I know what this person wants, right? And therefore, when I look at what kind of stuff is this person doing, what kind of jobs is he or she applying to, what kind of recruiters are viewing and downloading this profile, because we've got data on both sides, right? There is a recruiter doing action and there is a job seeker taking action. Right. So when you have insights, and when you look at data and try to drive insights from this, you can definitely give a far more personalized and relevant experience to this job seeker. So I think today technologies have made it easy not to just be personalized and relevant to a cohort, but to an individual, and that is what first party data really enables. So I would just I wanted to give this example just to make it a little easier. So better personalization, better behavioral targeting, and therefore within your site, giving your user a far better and rich experience, and also building it into the CRM. And today, when a user is most users are not unique to just one platform. We see that there is a large proportion of users who use you during the day. They use you through different profiles, right? So they use you through the desktop also. The same user comes to you maybe sometime during the day or on a weekend through the mobile platform, and a lot of them use you on the app as well. So it becomes far more important because you want to recognize that user, number one, because the users coming in from different sources or platforms, and therefore give the user a far better experience. So these are some of the advantages of actually first party data, and how companies like Into Matching or e-commerce, for example, can help upsell, etc. Knowing what the person has bought, etc.
Right. Thanks for that.
So better experience.
Absolutely. I think better experience, and a couple of points, very important points that you made was when it comes to serving personalized experiences, when it comes to serving relevant experiences, and how first party data has enriched the ability to kind of do that. Abhishek, I want to kind of segue to you from that note. In your profile, I'm sure that you guys must be interfacing with a variety of different merchants that use your product across the country, maybe hundreds and thousands of merchants that use your products across the country. And of course, these merchants have their own customers, and these merchants have their own CRM cycles, but you're serving as a centralized backend to them. And Sumit made a very valid and very interesting point, saying that there's a lot of duplication, right? At a consumer level, at multiple different touch points, there's a lot of duplication, saying it's the same user who must be interacting with your business in some form or the other, or in simple words, a lot of overlap, right? And because you guys deal with a variety of different merchants, how important is it for businesses like yours today to move to first party data as opposed to only be dependent on second party data that you get through the merchants that you work on?
Yeah. I think Sumit really explained it in a very good way, and Neeraj as well. I think for a company like BharatPe, where we are targeting merchants all over the country, and we have 5 to 6 million merchants on our platform now. And yes, duplication happens every now and then. The same user is with Paytm, the same user is with PhonePe. A lot of them are on Google Pay as well. First party data becomes a game changer for us, because like Sunil also said, we can create personalized experience, and we can actually create cohorts and start targeting these merchants with separate campaigns. And like with every business, 20% of the people actually run 80% of your business. So that gives you a lot of levers to play around with those 20% of your customers. And of course, you can cross-sell, and you can create campaigns targeting based on people who have taken a certain action and interacted with a certain product on your app. And of course, when you plug in marketing automation tools and with this first-party data that you are using, you can actually create razor sharp campaigns yielding great results. I mean, be it milking them, milking your golden users, or probably cross-selling them different products, or probably creating user segments or consumer segments of people who have probably a similar profile and have bought similar products. You can actually create lookalike audience on your own platform, quite like how you do it on Google and Facebook. So first party data for us, uh, we are using it in a big way to mainly grow on our customers who have uh, mainly people who have got the who are revenue generating for us, and also people who are sitting at the bottom of the pyramid. We keep on targeting them using specified campaigns created basis on those segmentations.
Super. So Abhishek, two very interesting points you spoke about at the tail end. You spoke about customers who are revenue generating for you, and early on when you were introducing the concept of First Data for your organization, you spoke about customers who take certain actions. Neeraj, I'm going to tag you in over here because when you spoke earlier, you spoke about first party data, and the first example that you gave us is transactional data, right? Transactional data falls right into the two buckets that Abhishek spoke about: users who take actions and users who drive revenue. Now, of course, this has a lot of benefits as far as impact of your efforts and initiatives in terms of your campaigns are concerned. And I'm sure that impact must be having some kind of beneficial ROI as well. Now, you guys do a lot of very interesting work in the BFSI space as well. So could you give us a couple of examples when these revenue generating customers generate some data points to you and you're able to use those data points to drive impact that results in some kind of ROI?
Absolutely. I think just to look at the sheer numbers here, the recurring theme, and especially over the last 18 months, is customer retention. So once you get hold of a customer, how do you hold on to the customer? It's at one level from a fintech play point of view, it's a valuation thing. I must also say that fintech at this point of time is really driving customer experience and first party data experiences. The needle is now moving from acquisition to customer retention. So they've got millions of people. Now, how do you retain ththose customers? So, at Hansa Security, we have an insight team which is actually kind of worked on an algorithm. It says it costs anywhere from 5x to 25x to acquire new customers compared to retaining an existing customers. The cost of acquiring customers is going up by the day, by the minute. Increasing customer retention by just say maybe 5 or 7% increases profits from 25 to 50%.
Wow.
With repeat customers, and these repeat customers on an average, they spend 50 to 60% more than a new customer who's coming on. So I think I rest my case as far as the importance of how to leverage first party data and why it is important at this point of time. It is beyond doubt that it is most crucial. It is survival now for a lot of organizations. Now, when we move forward, and when you spoke about, so how do you put it to use? I mean, you get different data points. So the biggest challenge at this juncture, and fintech comes with a clean slate. They don't have any legacy system. So day one start hit the ground running, rubber meets the road, and they do what they want to do. But when you're talking large organizations, banks, automotive companies who've been in business for 50 years, 100 years, it's very difficult to change tracks, very difficult to move from the old legacy to the new legacy. Now, more than 40% of businesses in India still have more than 80% of their customer data stored in separate systems as we speak. So that's the scale of the problem that we're looking at. The BFSI space has made huge inroads in the last 10 to 15 years, primarily because data is required, is essential, and they've put the systems, they've had the money, they've had the investments to start gathering all this kind of data. Basically, BFSI is working on connected customer experiences at this point of time. So if I am interacting with them on a website and I've left my mobile number, I'll get a call within the next 2 minutes. That's the tact with most of these companies. So Bharat will call me within 2 minutes if I've left a lead saying I want this or I want some more information from you. They'll reach out to me on their WhatsApp or business channel. They reach out to me on an SMS or an email if I've dropped my email. multiple touch points, they'll reach out to me. And depending on which touch point I respond to, they will start communicating to me there. What this does is it does two things. First, they kind of understood, okay, Neeraj doesn't want to be called. Neeraj wants to be communicated either through WhatsApp or through email. Let me do it. It's probably a more cost-effective channel than getting somebody to call him. So it works from a cost effectiveness point of view, and it works from a customer experience point of view. Second is, what is Neeraj looking for? So if he's come to my website and he's spent 5 or 7 minutes on a particular product or scheme or fund, then what is he looking for? I already kind of have the drift of that. Then let me communicate about that information to him. Let me give him more information which will help him decide, make that decision. If he's gone to say an e-commerce website and he's put something in a cart and he's not closed the sale, in the next 20 seconds, can I push him, nudge him, as we call in behavioral economics, to get him to take some action on that? Can I throw an offer right now, which is valid only for the next 30 minutes, 1 hour, whatever? So those are the things which are helping brands and organizations getting closure on sales. So marketing has never seen this before. Okay, marketing used to be spray and pray. Marketing heads used to spend all their time doing TV commercials and stuff. I think that this fundamental changes happened. They need to spend much more time with data-driven teams within their organizations and outside their organizations.
Super. Neeraj, you spoke very passionately about customer retention, right? And I think as marketers, we all acknowledge how important that is to driving bottom line results, like you rightly said, right? And I don't think we need to speak more about that. But Sumit, very interestingly, you have one business in your portfolio for whom customer retention is not the KPI at all. You want that customer to come, transact, and never ever come back to your website. And that's when you're going to earmark success, right? And we're obviously talking about Jeevan Sathi, where you don't want to retain customers. You want them to transact successfully and disappear and never come to you ever again. So I'm sure you have a slightly different take on things with the softer and more humane side of life. Why don't you talk about your experiences with Jeevan Sathi and tell us how first-party data helps in that environment as well?
Okay. So, yeah, very rightly said. But, typically, I think the cycle in an arranged marriage kind of a setup, which is where portals like Jeevan Sathi help people find their matches, people give themselves anywhere between 6 months to about, say, a year and a half or two to find the right match, right? Because very few are that lucky that you find the match very, very quickly, right? So I think, therefore, retention in not as in Naukri, where you want the user to be with you lifelong, as you very rightly said. But within that period, it's very important to have people active, right? And in a business like ours, the only way you will have them active is if you are serving them relevant profiles. Yeah. So like I spoke about some typical examples in Naukri, one of the things in marriage is, when you come onto the portal, there is a different kind of excitement. You are just starting out on your journey. And those of us who are married, when we start looking out and when we want to describe who that ideal spouse should be, there are lots of qualities that we write, By the time we actually find one, and if we go back to our checklist and the qualities we had written, very often we feel, oh, this is missing, this is missing, this is missing. And this doesn't just happen in, love marriages, and therefore love is called blind, but also in arranged marriages, you start with an ideal list, right? And then as you keep meeting people, if you're very lucky, you found about 70-80% of the qualities you listed. Very few are actually lucky to that extent. As you go on, you keep relaxing that list. However, when you're on a portal and not really talking to a human being, you forget to go and edit it on your profile, because the profile I made was maybe 3 months ago. I wrote everything in my desired partner profile. We have something called the DPP, which is the desired partner profile. I wrote what I wanted, or if my parents filled the form, they wrote what was most important to them. As you progress in the journey, the 4th month, so when we look at behavior, we see how the behavior is changing so much in month 5 versus month 2, in month 8 versus month 4, right? But this does not get appended onto the profile. So for sites like Jeevan Sathi, I think it's very, very imperative, because then when you see that this person wrote, I want this height, I want this profession, or I want this kind of salary, right? Or increasingly, we're also seeing that you write certain castes, but by the 5th or 6th months, you actually also start accepting interest from people who do not belong to that caste, right? And in arranged marriages, even now, apart from the metros, caste, people are very sensitive to caste. So for a portal to kind of send everything matching minus caste as a recommendation is not something that parents really appreciate or profiles really appreciate, right? Unless they have written caste NOBA. But when you keep mapping their behavior through the weeks and through the months that they've been on the site, you actually see how there is so much of difference in the DPP then and the behavior now. So it really has helped us to retain customers in the shorter time, because you are now sending them stuff which is relevant to the stuff that they are searching now. And very often they forget. So when we send matches on behavior where we see a very, very different behavior, I started out saying, I want a Gursikh and he must be a Gursikh, so I don't want a Katsard. But you suddenly start seeing that, yeah, where everybody's interest who she's accepting is actually a Katsard, right? But she's written Gursikh and all this. So when you start serving those profiles to me, and I will start accepting them. So first party data becomes extremely important in a site like Jeevansathi because of the fact that, you know, what we start with and what we relax, we do end up relaxing a few things, even in an arranged marriage setup, you know. So, and we see that very, very often. And we see it across not only behavior of profiles, which is people who are looking for a spouse, but a lot of parents also access portals, you know, and go through profiles. You can see it in their shortlisting behavior, in the behavior of accepting an interest, in a behavior of sending an interest to somebody. So it's very, very important because then you realize these softer things, which otherwise I don't think one could have realized.
Oh, that's so
yes,
interesting.
we don't want them to come back. We wish them all the best. But it's very, very important in the short run, you know, to find that
absolutely. Part. And it's so interesting because effectively what you're talking about is you're talking about the evolution of consumer behavior over a period of time, which is actually motivated a lot by ego, right? Not ego, but by emotions, right? And
emotions.
Finding the right partner, not finding the right partner, matching, not matching, you know, whatever the conversation rolls out, etc. On the other hand, Abhishek, you know, if I come to you, it's ironic because 3 years ago when you guys started Bharat Pay, the narrative was, hey, look, we want to bring a certain amount of homogeneity to consumer behavior, right? When you started, we said we'd launch a QR code and we want to standardize user behavior, saying one QR code, one destination for all your payments. However, as we've identified with Neeraj and Sumeet's examples, consumer behavior is not in our control, right? What we're trying to do here is influence a certain amount of protocol or consumer behavior, but that's not really in our control. So how do we kind of use the benefits of first party data to despite the fact that consumer behavior is not in our control, still strengthen our consumer relationships?
Right. So, I think Neeraj touched upon it briefly. So when it comes to retention, or probably we all want to acquire new users and probably retain them for long. And of course, user behavior is not in our control, but there are a few levers that can actually help you stay on top of their mind and also keep using your product and retain with you for long. So one of the things that just clicked on my mind the moment Neeraj was sharing his idea briefly. We were able to use first party data to actually predict based on user behavior that in which week or in which month this consumer will actually drop out of our funnel or probably will stop using our product. And we were actually able to create some cohorts, some segments to actually see, okay, this particular segment is actually behaving in that particular manner, where this will probably drop out in week 2 or week 3 or week 4 of its life cycle. And we were able to correct those behaviors early, and we were able to spot them, correct them, and we were able to stop that churn from going out. So that really helped us boosting our top line and bottom line at the end of the day. I mean, and it really worked in the payments business and in the lending business for us.
Abhishek, it'd be interesting if you could give us one insight as an example, maybe one insight that you caught that you were able to correct as far as consumer behavior is concerned, and therefore retain the user that contributed to top line.
Sure. There are two legs of our business. One is payments business where we do customer acquisition, and the other is lending business where we actually earn our monies from. So for in payments business, let's say if a user is not transacting in the first 3 days, his probability to drop would be 80%. So if we can actually make him transact in the first 3 days, we are actually reducing or probably increasing the probability of him sticking around with us for long. And probably a couple of other insights would be how many times is he transacting in a day, in a week's time, in a month's time, and then probably correcting those small behaviors by just giving him some incentives. Earlier, like Paytm and PhonePe used to do the same thing using cashbacks. We have done some bit of it, but we were not in 100% favor of building cashback based businesses. So we wanted to build long-term long-lasting relationships. So we took it to a different level. We started bonding with our user based on larger than life experiences. So we created a loyalty program based on cricket merchandise, and we just played around with the gamification bit of it. That okay, if you wanna do your first transaction on your day 1 or day 2 or day 3, you're gonna get a signed hand signed cricket merchandise from our side, or something, or probably a chance to meet your favorite cricket star or something like that. So using these as levers, we were able to impact user behavior early on, so that they stick around for us for long, and probably if they cross a certain frequency, let's say for us that was 18 transactions in a month, they actually stick with us for at least 12 months. So that's what our data told us.
Lovely, lovely. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of rich data being collected on the product side, both with Sumit and Abhishek. Your products being very, very data rich in nature. But Neeraj, we have businesses on the services side. We're working with customers, across the board, advertisers across the board, helping them launch their brands across, platforms, digital across the board. And a few months ago, Google released this update. They made a press release saying, look, we don't want to start collecting, we want to stop collecting third-party data and cookies across our browser, across Chrome. And this put a lot of advertisers into quandary, right? First, people didn't understand why. They didn't understand what the impact of this would be on their advertising campaigns, because advertisers typically for us are clients, right? There was a certain amount of nervousness in terms of how this would impact them. So according to you, what's been the sentiment with advertisers, and how have they kind of received this pivot towards first party data, with us minimizing our dependency on third party data as we move forward into the year? Neeraj, I think you've muted us again.
First of all, when Google phases out cookies in 2022, more than 76% of browser cookies vanish. It's very difficult at this point of time to imagine a scenario for advertising with no cookies. The biggest reason behind all that is happening at this point of time is primarily because of the shortcomings of the cookies itself, malicious use, misuse of personal data. The other important reason is GDPR coming in, CCPA, PD in India. The PDP is coming in any day. Parliament should approve it, and it kind of becomes a law, and then it becomes difficult to use that. The third reason is that most of the browsers have started blocking. I mean, it's been 2 years since Mozilla, Firefox, Safaris of the world have started blocking all of that. There are many more browsers today which is taken off, like DuckDuckGo and other examples, which are doing very well because they kind of take care of the privacy concerns, which has been a very important reason for people wanting to move out of this. Many such more reasons can be given. So when Google started out their advertising business, actually cookie data was not their business model. Okay, they kind of stumbled upon it, and what a big stumble it was. A fantastic one. Changed the game as far as advertising and cookies was concerned. A study done by Google actually recently said that top global publishers will lose more than 50% of their revenues once this kicks in. Okay, so the implications that we're looking upon are huge. The good part is it is bound to happen. It should happen. It will happen. And we've had a 2-year, 3-year run in to prepare ourselves for this scenario. And I think industry is preparing itself. A lot of steps have been taken to kind of address what we are going to face over the next 1.5 years. Basically, and that's where again, first party data is really become very, very important. And, all of us spoke about first party data, but what we also do at Security is we build a customer single view. So say I'm running a contact center for an automotive company. I know Neeraj inquired about this brand 4 years back. He went on this Car Dekho website and he compared the brands. Then he went to the dealership and he bought, say, X brand on this date. Then he had a 3-year warranty period with me and service period with me, and he serviced his car with me 7 times out of it. Every time the bill was 20,000, 25,000, whatever. So I earned some 2 lakh rupees from him over servicing over the 3-year period. He's now calling me and he has some work with me. And when the contact center agent is talking to that person, because my mobile number is with the organization, all my data is flashed in front of him. The experience becomes phenomenal for Neeraj at that point of time. Okay. So building that single view with whatever data you're getting, even from if Neeraj has made a comment and somebody rightly mentioned, you only go to complain on social media about brands, but even the complaints can be filtered out. You can do scraping and get all that information going for you. So you build a very, very solid customer single view. So that's where first party data, all of this is first party data. Most brands do not realize the amount of dark data which is lying with themselves. Okay. I used to always keep wondering, and I'm going way back in time before really data became fashionable. 10 years back, you go to say any mall or say a Shopper Stop or a Landmark or a Lifestyle. You go, you buy some stuff, and then you go to the alteration desk. Okay, the size is not accurate. So you give your measurements there. You give your residential address there. You give your mobile number there. Probably they'll come and drop it. You leave all your important information there. None of these guys ever picked it up. It was lying on some paper and used to be thrown away by the watchman of that place. So a lot of dark data resides in various places. The marketers really apply their minds. They can really, and this is a treasure trove of information. It's personal, and you know exactly Neeraj's size, which material he bought, what are the kind of things he wears. Every last detail is on that piece of paper. So how can you bring all of that into building a customer single view? That's how people can really kind of take care of this cookieless world that we are going to enter. Of course, there are a lot of other things, a customer data platform where it's primarily from a marketer's perspective. There are a lot of other platforms, but they are not so easy or comfortable to use. CDPs are built from a marketer's perspective, and it gives a lot of advantages. Geo-targeting is another way. A lot of connected TV. We're going into an era of connected TVs. What I watch, and that channel can become my preferred channel, and the connected TV brand knows about it. The brands that come on there can be in that context. A lot of other techniques, browser fingerprinting. I'm sure a lot of us already are working on this. Basically, how do you get the online fingerprint using tracking techniques to ensure that you're on top of it? Google itself is working on the privacy sandbox, basically, which is aiming at efficient deliveries, group contextual targeting. So you don't have individual customer or individual IDs, so to speak, but those are group IDs. So how a group behaves, you can target that group as an advertiser. So a lot of interesting stuff is happening in this space. And I think this was bound to happen. I am not looking at it as a big colossal event which will spiral us down some unknown path. I think we will only get better. Marketers will get better. Publishers will get better at what they do. And I think the customer will benefit hugely, immensely at the end of all of this.
Absolutely. So, Neeraj, you brought up some very interesting and relevant points about how, on one hand, you said you very interesting phrase. You said before data was fashionable about 10 years ago. And at this point of time, Sumita, I want to tag you in because, of course, InfoEdge has been around for over 2 decades now. And, you guys, I'm sure in different formats have been collecting data, over the last couple of decades since your businesses have been around. And Neeraj spoke about dark data that we didn't even know existed to, new touch points that we're able to collect data on. So obviously the best practices as far as data collection is concerned, even before we knew it as first party data or third party data and use these fancy labels to describe it, even before we knew it as this, I'm sure the protocol for data collection has evolved very greatly over the last, decade or two, as you've been seeing it with, IT enabled businesses such as yours. So can you tell us how the best practices have kind of evolved over the years from prior to the days when, as Neeraj said, data was cool and fancy?
I think one of the biggest realizations that most companies have had is that, and Neeraj brought it up as well, the importance of having data not captured and collected in silos, but at one place. Because typically, I think when we all started about 2 decades ago, we of course started in the internet space. So we always had data. We were an online company, but marketing would collect some aspects of data of a job seeker and some aspects of a data of a recruiter. Product would collect another set of aspects. Then early on in 2007, we had a business intelligence team, and that was the quasi data science team then. And they came in and they made life a little easier. But data in silos actually doesn't speak much. And it also ends up in a lot of, typically debates between tech and product and marketing in meetings. You realize that everybody is giving data about the same person, but all the data is actually different, right? So I think before getting into how and what tools should one use, I think the best practices are first having a data governance policy. Who's going to be the owner, and having this policy in place really, really helps, because otherwise you falter and make mistakes too many times. So it's better to learn from the ones who made those mistakes. So have a good, tight data governance policy, and then have, whether it's a team, a person, a department, an individual, depending on the company structure, have the ownership of data collection. The second one I would say is, what data do you want to collect? So there is a lot of data available. And as Neeraj was giving an example of, companies sitting on dark data, just capturing everything. And see, data collection, capturing data, analyzing that data is a costly affair as well, right? There are costs involved, resources involved. So I think all the departments, whoever the stakeholders are, they should really think a little that what do I want to capture and what am I going to do about this data, right? Otherwise, it's nice to capture every data point. So if you come and ask a person in general, a person will say, yeah, I want everything that this person does. What are you going to use and for what purpose? I think that's an important question to answer. And sometimes you forget that because you want to just have every data point there, but you might be using only 10% of the data that is available to you. So I think determining what is critical at that stage, it's evolving, it will keep getting better. You start measuring, then you improve, then you go more granular. I think that's a cycle that it's a cycle of evolution, right? You start looking at something, you start improving that something, then you say, let me look deeper, let me look into finer cohorts and granular, and let it be like that rather than everything. Then I think there are a few things like, I've already mentioned, it should definitely be at one place, because data in silos is really a disaster. It doesn't help the organization, right? And if it is in different places, Neeraj gave an example, right? A wonderful example of a customer calling up, then all that would not come up on the screen and that person would not know, right, what's happening. Another thing, a few things to keep in mind are then, how soon does your data decay? What kind of noise does it have? Etc., etc. And that will be very typical to typical businesses. So I would call that maybe data security, data accuracy under that umbrella. And of course, then what tools should I be using, right? How should I collect this data? So once all this is in place, I think for What tools, I'm not a technical person myself, but yes, we work very, very closely with data science. And for years, we've been using a lot of tools ourselves for marketing analytics, as well as user journey propagation, etc. And what are some of the basic things that we think about is how do they collect and how do they analyze data? Because every tool has its own IP, has its own way. So how does data collection and analysis happen? What will it let me do? So there are tools available that, because of their AI and ML capabilities, can create user cohorts or user profile segments, journeys on their own, looking at certain things. While others, you need to feed in a lot of data, and so they are customizable, but you need to feed in data to create the cohorts. So it depends on your requirements. Definitely, whatever you are going to use to collect this data should be scalable, right? Because once you get hooked onto data and once you see how it really helps you in all your objectives, in your marketing objectives, etc., you get better ROI in your retention objectives, you will want more and more. So definitely have a scalable model. And what is also very important is that how easy is this tool or whatever software you're using to integrate with other systems within the organization. Because ultimately, if the data is just lying there and not talking to other systems, other platforms, other packages that you're using, then that data is of no use. Absolutely. So I think that's also something important. In our company, while we as marketing are involved in this decision, but the technical guys actually take this decision as to which is the best tool, etc. We basically give them our requirements and they actually shortlist what they feel is the right form of data, not from marketing analytics point of view, but from a data collection and insight point of view. And then they kind of showcase things to us and then we see. And of course, as marketers or as users of that data, usability, the way the data is coming to you, etc., also is very, very important. But I would say those things really depend on the user, the stakeholders who are going to use this data. So these would be the three main things: integration, methodology, what is happening, and of course, this whole piece of how scalable is the solution that you're using. So these are some of the points. And of course, tech always keeps saying we also look at how complex or easy is it to set up this particular thing, because that I think is also a major consideration for them.
Of course.
Those are some of the things that I can share.
I like how this conversation is evolving because, we started off by talking about serving relevant and personalized experiences to our customers. And now we've taken the onus back on ourselves and we're saying that we need to now collect relevant data and, that we can actually use, that we can actually action, and that can be effective because we can get lost in this myriad of data. And to a certain extent, we are also trying to create some guidelines or maybe some, limitations or restrictions around which we govern ourselves. And, Sumit, you brought up two interesting points here. One is in context to policy and the second is in context to security as well. And Abhishek, I'm going to tag you in now because when it comes to policy and security, when it comes to neobanks and banking and financial services and payments, I think the most highly regulated when it comes to policy, and we've seen the evolution in India of the IT Act, and Neeraj briefly referred to the GDPR, and of course in India more effectively we have the RSPPR, etc., that really governs how data can be collected and used. And without getting into too much technical detail, I would love to hear from you in terms of what kind of limitations these policies from a security perspective create when it comes to both collection and usage of data.
So one of the I would say not so good. I mean, the good thing is, of course, the consumer data is secured, and of course, it's all financial transactional data, so it needs that sort of a security. However, from a marketing perspective, it actually involves a lot of steps, especially, I mean, we do not get to see that data, which is also a good part, that now the data can be directly plugged into the marketing platform itself, and we can just create those campaigns right from that platform itself without actually doing the initial data filtering and massaging that we used to do in our early days. Now that just happens on the automation platform itself. And then we have also created an in-house data management platform as per the requirement and the policy that the government requires in handling those transaction and user data. So for us, the life has actually become simpler now versus what it used to be in early days. By creating these internal data management platform. And like Neeraj also said, the single view of customer, that has been a very important project that ran for almost 6 to 8 months internally. But finally, we were able to achieve that. And we are right now in process of implementing it across consumer touchpoints. And once that is implemented, I think the consumer experience and eventually the brand experience will also go up multifold, because consumers will be, we as marketers will be able to understand every action that they take across brand touchpoints. So that will help us create better communication, probably serve them in a more relevant way. And of course, for the customer as well, that they can get personalized experience based on, and everything is just standing on the first party data that we have been collecting during our onboarding journey, and whenever they get in touch with us across points, or we get in touch with them across brand touch points.
Super. On that note, we'll sign off. Thank you so much, Sumit, Neeraj, and Abhishek. It was lovely having you guys on the panel. And I hope that you guys can spare a few minutes after we're done to answer a few of the questions that are sitting on the question forum. And thank you guys for participating. I hope you had a nice time.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.